It's my pleasure to introduce Arun Sarin. As many of you know, before I was at Anderson, I worked 18 years at Vodafone. And I have to say, you kind of think about your career and who you've learned so much from. Arun's probably got the #1 market share position in my mind in terms of everything that I've learned about how do you place bets on promising areas, how do you think about technology, how do you think about global context, opportunities that vary place to place, and finally, most importantly, people leadership. How do you align a group of people to create high performance, create an environment that's going to be successful? So just a couple of brief words on Arun and his background. As many of you know, he was the CEO of Vodafone from 2003 to 2008. He accomplished so many things, but if you were to boil down two things that were most notable about his tenure, #1 is expanding into a lot of high-growth emerging markets. So whether that be India, whether it be Czech Republic, Romania, Turkey, etc. The second thing is expanding the definition of products and services into broadly total communications. So not just mobile, but fixed broadband, internet, a range of services that customers need. Arun started his career at Pacific Telesis Group. This is a bit of a history question, but that was the original phone company here in California as a breakup of the AT&T monopoly way back when. And the business that Arun joined, he took on a variety of executive roles and invested in a lot of wireless plays. So wireless ventures here in the United States and abroad that ultimately led to the spin-off of a group called AirTouch Communications. That was the wireless arm of Pacific Telesis that later became Vodafone, and Vodafone being the largest mobile operator in the world. Today, Arun is on a great set of boards. He's on the board of Cisco, of Charles Schwab, of Safeway, of Blackhawk Networks. He's also a senior advisor to KKR, the big private equity firm. He also, I love this trivia piece, but he's got an honorary knighthood from the Queen of England during his time in the UK. You can ask him more about what that's like. He's originally from India, went to IIT, and later got his MBA from UC Berkeley, the Haas School, and please suppress any boos you have about that. He did well despite that. And so just a final couple comments. We'll do Q&A, probably it'll be 20, 25 minutes into it. Please come down to the mic if you do have questions, and then there are lunches at the very end. So again, thank you for being here, Arun. Please come on up.
Good morning, everybody. Terry, thank you for that introduction. I've known Terry for 25 years or so. This is the first time that he's admitted that he's learned anything from me. I don't know if I'm incapable of teaching or he's incapable of learning. By the way, if any of you want your grades improved and you want to know the inside story on Terry, please come by afterwards. I'm happy to talk to you. Look, what I wanted to do today is tell you a little bit about mobility and the mobile economy. And I've been in this field now for 25 years, pretty much from the beginning in 1984. And while we created a great company and did great things all over the world, I think that actually we've only just begun. Because where we are today is everybody has a smartphone and everybody has a tablet here in the United States, and will soon be the case in the rest of the world. There's still a lot of feature phones in the rest of the world, in Africa and India and other places, but very soon you'll find everybody will have smartphones and tablets, and the world will be completely mobile and broadband and all of that. And the question is, okay, this is what guys like Terry and I have done for 25 years. Now, what are the next 25 years going to bring because you now have broadband and tablets and smartphones and everything else? And my hypothesis to you today is that we're in now a mobile economy that will completely transform the way people live, work, enjoy themselves. And if you knew how the world was wired or how the economy was wired, it's now going to be a mobile economy. And that's what I want to frankly tease out today. I'm happy to go back and tell you a little bit about the lessons learned in the last 5, 10, 15 years, and they're very important to know and understand, especially since this is mostly an MBA class and sort of technology entrepreneurship class. But the most important thing is to think about the future and how each of you are going to fit in that world. And it's a very exciting world. So that's what I'm hoping to do in about 20 or 25 minutes, and then open up for any Q&A that you might want to engage in. So let me start at the top and say, first, I want to go straight on to the lessons. I'm happy to tell you, when we started, actually our first mobile system that we built was here in Los Angeles in 1984, 85, 86. It was called Pacific Pactel, then went on to AirTouch, and that became Verizon, and so on and so forth, and we can talk through the history there. And it is now proven beyond doubt that mobility and cell phone systems have positively impacted economies and GDP virtually anywhere in the world. We did a big study in Africa and found that for every 10% increase in penetration of mobile phones, that the GDP went up about 1.5% in that particular country. And you can think about why that might be the case in terms of information and connectivity, and whether it's in healthcare or education or whatever part of society you are, cell phones make the wheels go a bit faster and a bit easier. So the question is, having sort of done business around the world and having built these companies all over the world, sort of what are the 1 or 2 or 3 core lessons? And once we get past that, we should then move on to the future here. And what I'd say to you is that the core lesson here is timing of what you do is everything. I can't tell you how many speeches I've given since 1995 about how the world is going wireless and how all these great, wonderful things are going to happen, and you'll be able to do commerce, you'll be able to get on a plane with the swipe of a phone, and you'll be able to have contactless money flowing and all of that, and M2M is coming, and you might all look at me and say, and? Some of it has come to fruition. Other parts of it will come to fruition in the future. And the mobile industry and the technology industry in general slightly overpromises and slightly underdelivers in the near term. But actually, it overdelivers in the longer term. So my point is this. I mean, if you talk to people about the iPhone, and you say, absolute genius device, fantastic hardware, superb software, easy to use, great apps that came along. If the iPhone was born 2 or 3 years before 2007, it would not have done well, because there was no bandwidth, no mobility bandwidth to be able to use that device. I'm looking around the room. Most of you look way too young to me to remember the Palm phone or the Palm Pilot. All sort of good, cool devices that came along but were 7 or 8 years before their time. And then here came the iPhone with hardware, integrated software, integrated apps, and 3G plus speeds. And it was beautiful, and it lit up the world, and it started a revolution that we're all part of now. But timing is very, very key. I can't tell you how many things we have talked about for so long, and then they come along 5 years later, or 7 years later, or 9 years later, or 2 years later. And of course, if the iPhone was born 2 or 3 years after it was born, Samsung and others might have actually, might have had a different story to tell. So timing is key. Make sure that whatever it is that you're excited about, that you want to do, that the entire ecosystem is lined up. Because if the ecosystem is not lined up and one important component is not there, even though you might have had the best hardware and the best software and the best apps, if you didn't have the broadband connectivity, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. So that's something to think really hard about when you think about ventures you might want to do or things that you might want to be involved in. Now, understanding the economics of the business that you're in is pretty key. Because a lot of people end up spending a lot of time doing things in sort of the wrong part of the value chain. And they spend an entire career there. And when they've spent a decade or two, they kind of go, oops, I was in the wrong end of this ecosystem. So as you graduate and you think about what it is you're going to do next or what you're going to start next, make sure you're in the right segment of the ecosystem. And I want to do a little test with you here on sort of what the ecosystem of the mobile industry looked like 5 years ago. What does it look like today? And then we'll do a quick sort of Q&A on what do you think it looks like 5 years from now, just as an example of thinking about ecosystems and making sure that you're sort of in the right place. So I'm going to start with, let me go back a few years and go to 2007. Okay. And I'm going to do what did the hardware cost? What did the software cost? What did the apps and content do? And what was the connectivity, which is sort of the industry that I'm coming from. This is the Vodafone industry. The hardware would be sort of the Apples of the world. Software could be the Googles of the world. Content and apps, there are a whole bunch of people in this space. And then what was the total cost to a consumer? So in 2007, and by the way, the speed at which you were traveling, the connectivity speed, back in 2007, I'm being slightly generous, was 0.5 megabit per second. Just take that as a number. Don't worry about that too much. Back then, I'm doing a 2-year amortization, so I would say back in 2007, you'd probably pay $200 unsubsidized for a phone. The software was highly integrated with the hardware. You couldn't really do anything. There was no content, no apps to speak of. And the connectivity, you were paying about $50 a month. So your connectivity cost per year is $600. So your total costs would sort of, let's say you would be in the $700 per year in terms of the economy. Now let's go fast forward to today. Let's do 2014, when you've got iPhones and Samsungs and so on and so forth. And I would say the hardware today is close to $500 on an unsubsidized basis. I'm going to take $100 out of it for software. And since this is a 2-year amortization, I'm going to put $50 into software, $200 into hardware, and I would say content and apps about $50. And actually the number here in terms of connectivity has gone up a little bit, so you're at $700. And so your total now is $900. You're almost at $1,000. And your speeds are 2-3 megabits per second. I know this is taking a little while to develop, but stay with me, okay? This is an MBA class, right? Right. So so you look at this and you kind of go, all right. So what do I take away? What do I take away from this? This would say, not bad to be in the hardware business. You started off with $100 phones before iPhone. And you can now get 200. That's pretty good. That's a positive vector. And this is thanks to all the really cool stuff that gets put into a phone these days. And then software, obviously, whether it's Android or iOS or other forms of software, you see that number being a positive number going from 0 to 50. That's a good place to be in. You say content, yep, lots of new content's coming along, lots of apps being created. That's a pretty good space. That's another 50 delta. That's pretty good. And even the connectivity space, even though operators have to put in 15% of their revenues go into CapEx every year, that may be true, but the amount of money they're getting from consumers is going up. And as a customer, you used to pay $700 back then, you're paying $1,000 now, but you're going at much faster speed, you're having much cooler experiences, and you're able to stay in touch with anything and everything. And so we all love the fact that we have our iPhones and Samsungs and so on. So you could say, yeah, I see this, and you could say, well, do I want to participate in the hardware business? Do I want to participate in the software business? Do I want to participate in the content and apps business? Or do I want to participate in the sort of the broadband, wireless broadband business? And you can ask yourself which part of this sort of turns you on or doesn't turn you on. The key is we are where we are today. And the question for all of you as you graduate and you kind of go into the economy is, what do you think this looks like 5 years from now? And that's really where I want you to kind of just ponder for a second and say, I'm now in, say, 2020. What do you think is going to happen to hardware, software, content, apps, and connectivity? Now, nobody obviously knows the answer for sure, but if you start thinking and you say, okay, hardware, you've got the Xiaomis that are coming up with new hardware. There are a whole bunch of people who will get into the hardware game. It'll be cool, even cooler, in terms of what hardware will be able to do. But do you think this number is going up, or is it going down? Down. Is there anybody who says it's likely to go up because there'll be so many cool things that actually it's going to go up? This is all, we got one here. That's excellent. We always need one on the other side so that we can make a market here. Otherwise, no markets get made. Well, my view is, look, you can do whatever you want, but the price of hardware is coming down. It's not just because of Moore's Law, not just because of anything else, but just because in the hardware world, the rents that Apple has been able to take are extraordinary, unheard of. But you can't keep making this kind of money forever. You just can't do it, right? And there'll be competition from all over the world, and this number is coming down, even though the kinds of phones you'll have would be absolutely terrific. So let's just go to, I'm going to pick a number and say 100. Let's talk about software. Now, this is software. You can think of it as operating system. Think of it Android. And the reason I've got a number there, even though you don't pay separately for Android, is you are paying for it because your search is going through to Google, and Google is monetizing it with advertising. So there's no such thing as Android doesn't cost anything. Of course it costs something. And you're paying for it through your eyeballs and through the impressions that are going through your head. So what do you think here in terms of the software and the integration? And my own view here, because I can't keep doing this exercise with you all the time, is that actually the software is going to get cooler, better, more integrated, more things will come into it, and actually you can add more value through software. So the chances are that the value of the software in here is likely to go up a little bit. Now let's come on to the content and app side. So we've got the App Store, you've got a million things on the App Store, you've got the Google Play Store, you've got all of that stuff going on. What is your guess? Do you think this number goes up or goes down? Up because there are even more cool things that one can do that we haven't thought about yet that hopefully you will think about. Or, look, the game's up, this is all going to get thrown into it and content is going to have no value. Let me get a quick show of hands as to who thinks the value of the content is going up. Okay? And those who think the value of content is going down. Okay, we have half a dozen people. So it sounds, you can have a good, robust discussion about this, but my view is that the value of the content goes up. Principally because you're doing more things. The things that you're doing today is basic news and entertainment and games and so on and so forth. And 5 years from now, you'll basically be running your entire life, essentially, your finances, your health, your education, possibly, through this particular content and apps and so on and so forth. So you'd be willing to pay more to make your life easier and simpler. So my view is this goes up, and I'm just going to give a number of, let me say 100, because I want to have it be a little larger. And then let's come on to, and what do you think happens to all this broadband 4G stuff and everything else? You've got Verizon and AT&T and Sprint and T-Mobile, and in the future there'll be others who want to kind of come into this space. So do you think cell phone companies will be able to charge you more for the connectivity, given Wi-Fi in your home and office and everything being integrated, or is it likely to be less, even though they're having to spend tens of billions of dollars every year kind of giving you better, cooler, faster bandwidth? So those of you who think that cell phone companies can charge a bit more than what they charge us today, raise your hands. Okay? And those of you who think they'll be able to charge you less, raise your hands. Okay, so I would say less, 2 to 1 over more. So all of you who said more, I really, really, really love you guys, because that's the core business that I'm in and from. But I hate to say this, but I'll disappoint you. I'm actually in the camp that says it's going to be less, and it's going to be far less, frankly. It's going to be far less simply because there'll be substitutes, and principally because even though your speeds are going to go from 2, 3, 4 megabits per second to 20 to 25 megabits per second, what you'll find is that there's enough capacity, even though spectrum is scarce, there's enough capacity that you will not be able to charge any more than what you charge today. So you end up, let me go down to 500, you're still 600, 700, 775. The reason to go through this exercise is actually not the numerics of it, up or down, how much, and so on and so forth. It is, so where do you think the exciting part of the mobile ecosystem is through this exam? If you believe these numbers, where do you think it is? Where's the greatest delta? Where's the greatest delta? The greatest delta is coming in the content and app side for 50, positive 50, minus 200, positive 25, and minus 100. So what part of the ecosystem do you want to be in? So obviously in the software, content, apps piece of it, which is where most of the money is going to be made. This is not to say that the Verizons of the world won't make money, but they will incrementally make less money than they're making today. And the same is true of the hardware manufacturers. So whatever industry you're in, healthcare, financial services, should we talk about Dodd-Frank and see how Dodd-Frank is going to completely change how banks, commercial banks, investment banks, all these folks, what products and services they provide in the future. Every industry you look at it carefully from an economic standpoint and ask yourself, where are the economics going? And then put your chips down in terms of whether you want to be interested in doing structured finance or commercial banking or software or whatever part of the economy that you decide to participate in. I know Terry is sitting there going, God, Arun, you wasted a lot of time.
I'm worried about my portfolio.
So I'm going to stop here with kind of the backward looking. I really want to go forward looking, and then I want to take your questions. Now, in terms of forward looking, like I said, I think the mobile economy is going to be huge in the future, and not just here in the United States. In fact, I could make a case where the mobile economy is a bigger share of the total economy in places like Africa and India and China, where you're skipping over a complete generation of stuff. You know, there is no landline. There are no banks. There is no healthcare. There is no education. Now let's start afresh. How would you construct an economy like that? Would you construct it the way we've constructed it in the last 50 years? The answer is no. You bypass all this stuff, you go straight to the end game, and you provide all these services through mobility. We will go there too, but we will go there with friction. And the friction comes from existing interests that you have. If you're a bank today, you're trying to save everything that you got today before you kind of move on to the next thing. So innovation is going to happen all around the world. And I've written down the 4 or 5 things that, frankly, I'm most excited about when I think about the mobile economy. And we can, sort of dig into it deeper in the Q&A. So first, being in LA, I do have to say something about content, since you guys are the content kings of the world. And I would say content remains king. And it's been king for a long time. And it will remain king. If you can produce cool, relevant content, that content will always have a place in the world. The only thing I would say is that different formats are going to appear. So today we think about the television format, or we think about the movie format, or we think about the internet format. If you fast forward a little bit, you start thinking, if everybody has a smartphone and everybody has a tablet, and I'm consuming content, do I need to make a 45-minute show for consumption between 6 and 10 o'clock at night? Probably not. If I had shorter format shows that people, between this class and the next class, that you could get 5 minutes of entertainment from your favorite comedian or from your favorite newscaster, doesn't have to be 30 minutes or 60 minutes or 48 minutes. The format of content is going to change. And there is going to be disintermediation in terms of how we think about who generates the value in the content and how these folks can do things on their own and produce different format for different devices and be able to extract a lot of value. So when you think about content, content remains king, but the format is going to change. The second is convergence. And Terry and I will remember this from 10, 15 years ago. We've been talking about convergence for a long time. I'm here for the umpteenth time saying, and this time I have slightly more sort of oomph behind this, that convergence is going to happen. And what I mean by convergence here, because there are lots of different convergence in the technology industry, is that as a consumer, I can basically watch my favorite sports team on a television, on my computer, on my tablet, on my phone, on the go, completely. Anytime, anywhere, I'm having content move seamlessly. Now, we're beginning to see this beginning to take shape. But it'll be absolutely commonplace. Today, it's still a bit of a heave to get all your content going back and forth easily and stopping a movie here and starting it on your smartphone and so on and so forth. But we are now very close because of, again, cloud computing, because of streaming, because of software, because of hardware. This day is going to arrive. And frankly, if you think about AT&T buying DirecTV, you might sit here and argue with me as to why they didn't buy Dish. But AT&T coming together with DirecTV is a case in point where they're making a move saying, look, we do want to supply all of these things interchangeably to our consumers. So we can, again, delve into this in greater detail, but convergence, I think, is a big theme in the coming years. Digital payments. I've talked to you about this before. Back at Vodafone, we started a company called M-Pesa. We started this in Kenya, and it's a complete rage. You can send money, anybody to anybody, whether it's government to its citizens, whether it's a son to his mother in a village, whatever it is, our company in Kenya does M-Pesa. We've got 20 million subscribers there. It's catching fire. It's coming through Asia for reasons that I said before, because there are friction costs. If we try to introduce M-Pesa here, we'd be shut down by all the banks saying, you don't transfer money. A cell phone company doesn't transfer money. Banks transfer money. That is going to change. Equally, if you think about phones and you think about how credit cards, do you really need a piece of plastic that sits in your wallet, or can all of that just be on your phone? Now, there are one or two technological things that need to happen. Either NFC needs to come, or voice recognition needs to come, or some other authentication device needs to come. But the day when you use your phone, essentially, to make payments, and I'm not saying you're going to be paying your rent by swiping your phone against a particular device or a barcode or NFC device, but when you go into a Starbucks, or you buy your groceries, or you buy a newspaper, or you buy an apple, or whatever it is, it's all small transactions that don't have a huge sort of bad debt fraud issue associated with it. You should be able to do this in the coming years. And my own view is we're pretty close to that. We're pretty close to that date. I'm very excited about couponing and marketing and digital commerce. I'm on the board of Safeway, as Terry said. We've got a couponing service called Just For You. By the way, Safeway is a grocery chain around here, in case you haven't noticed. Please do use them. But the cool thing about Just For You is, because we know what an average customer buys in a week or a month. If we don't see you buying that from Safeway, we know you're buying that somewhere else. And that somewhere else could be Costco, the somewhere else could be Walmart, the somewhere else could be Whole Foods. So we then say, Arun is not buying his Tide or toilet paper or whatever here, so why don't we send Arun a really good deal on the things that he doesn't buy from us? Now, what Arun gets as coupons is different from what Terry gets, is different from what the dean gets. So it's everybody has individualized coupons sent to them. Very early stage, we're seeing great results from it. My view is that's the kind of one-to-one marketing that will be enabled with cell phones, because they are with you everywhere. Everybody's heard about the famous story of, you're going past a Starbucks, it's not very busy. We know from geolocation where you are, send you a quick little coupon saying when you walk in, you'll get $2 off your latte or whatever it is. And those kinds of things will happen as well. So phones will become a very important part of the marketing mix that you see in the future. I'll just do one more. And that would be around Internet of Things. Again, this has been talked about for at least 10 years. In the old days, we used to call it machine to machine. Now it's called the Internet of Things. It'll be called many other things before the day is over. But the point around having sensors all around us, so that, if we all vacated this room, the sensors will say, I feel no activity in this room. Turn everything off. So it'll turn everything off. The first person who walks in, the first bank of lights would come on. That person walks down the steps, all the other banks would come on. Digital meter reading. Extend that into healthcare. I was just with some folks in Silicon Valley, and one of the guys sitting next to me had a bulge in his shirt, and I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm fine." I said, "There's a bulge in your shirt." And he says he had a little device, and he was monitoring his heart rate that was going to the cloud, sitting in the cloud, and then his doctor would periodically get, and he's a perfectly healthy person. It's not like he had a heart problem that his doctor wanted to monitor him. So you'll find more and more people, and everybody knows about the Jawbone sort of wristbands and so on and so forth. More and more people will use sensors of some kind to measure their health, store it in the cloud, have it go to you, have it go to your friends, make it social. I'm always surprised by how much information people are willing to share with each other about how many steps they walk every day and what they eat and all of that. It's like, I don't want to know. But the sensors revolution, the Internet of Things, is going to come, and it's going to be very big in my view. It's going to be very big. Again, we can talk about these and other things that you might be excited about. I have to close with leadership. And, you know, in the coming years, 10, 20 years from now, you will be in leadership positions. You'll be, you know, general managers or something, or chief executives or something else, or leading great institutions all around the world. It's very important as leaders to think about three core things. One is you've got whatever institution you're leading, make sure you've got the strategic part right. Because you can't ask 30,000, 50,000, 100,000 people or 1,000 people to say, I want to take that hill, but I don't know which hill I want you to take. So strategically, you have to be very up to speed on what it is you want your organization to do. Because otherwise, you're not being a leader. The second is operational leadership. It's very important that you have enough metrics in your own thinking about what makes you successful so that you can mark them off, because that's how you measure progress on a weekly basis, monthly basis, daily basis, quarterly basis, yearly basis. So you've got to really focus on operations and making sure you're taking sort of the washout every day. And the third is about people leadership. You have to be a good people leader. Nobody wants to follow a person that they don't trust, that they don't want to be with. So make sure you're thinking hard about strategic leadership, operational leadership, people leadership, and all three simultaneously. That's what makes great leaders. Being able to do three things simultaneously. Equally, there'll be lots of pressures. You know, I can hardly think about any leader today when there isn't all the pressure. You think about the President of the United States. He can barely say something without the right sort of saying something about what he is doing or not doing. So from political leaders to CEOs, there's hardly a day that a CEO gets up that some activist investor is not saying, but hang on, why are you doing that? Why don't you just give me the money back? You know, why don't you bring all the money back from Europe? Why are you investing it here? Or why are you investing it there? And frankly, I had my share of it at Vodafone. When we started expanding into Africa and India and Turkey, there were lots and lots of my shareholders who said, Arun, this is completely mad. Don't do this. Just give us our money back. And I said, no. And they said they were unhappy. Here in the United States, if you tell a shareholder, look, this is our strategy, this is what we want to do, these are the economics, and this is how we're going to perform, measure us, a lot of the shareholders will say, look, I either buy into it or I don't buy into it. If I don't buy into it, I'll sell Vodafone, I'll buy AT&T. Fair enough. In Europe, because there are certain requirements for how much they have to own of UK companies, they don't sell because they can't sell. So they don't sell, but they keep reminding you that you're doing things that they don't like. So it just ends up being a longer drag, okay? Now, all I can say to you is if we had not invested, Vodafone just posted their results, the only place where Vodafone is growing double digits is in all the places that we invested. If we had stayed a European company, everything was minus 10%, right? So today they're all very happy, super, excellent, good, very strategic, and all of that. But believe me, for a couple of years, they were kind of biting my hand off. Equally with, we own 45% of Verizon Wireless. They wanted me to sell it. And I said, look, we need to stay in the United States. The United States is a very big mobile market, and this is going to be worth a lot more money. And they said, well, what can you sell it for now? And I said, this is 2007. I said I could sell it for $50 billion to Verizon. And they said, well, sell it. Sell the $50 billion, give us the $50 billion in a special dividend. You'll be our hero. And I said, no, I'm not going to sell it. They said, what do you think it's worth? I said, I don't know precisely, but I would say it's worth $100 billion in a few years as the market matures a little bit more. And my successor just sold our 45% to Verizon for $130 billion last year. Okay? But were they happy when I told them, no, I'm not going to sell it? No. And this is not just being polite. They were seriously unhappy that I didn't sell it. Now, what is the point about telling you this story? The point about telling you this story is, in leadership positions, you will come across very difficult situations. And I've just given you examples of 2 very difficult situations. And today I can stand here and make fun of it because, haha, I was right. But back then it wasn't that much fun, because the reason this arises is asymmetric information. The information that I have versus the information that one of my shareholders has. I've been in the business 25 years, and so I was confident that it would come out roses in the end. But as leaders, you will have difficult choices to make. And it's important to stand up and be counted. Because if you're going to wimp out of it and say, okay, I'll just sell it. I mean, would I have been happy? $50 billion, I was a large shareholder, I would have gotten my piece of it. Look, at that stage it looked great. But you would not have had the Vodafone that you have today. This company, at one stage, was the largest company on the planet when it came to mobility. Would not have existed. So you have to make difficult decisions for your successors. Don't succumb to near-term pressures. Do what is right for the institution. I'm going to stop with that. Questions now. I think Terry said there are a couple of microphones here. Feel free, or just raise your hand and speak up.
Hi, Sir Arun. My name is Aaron Kabacher.
By the way, we're here in the United States, and I'm a U.S. citizen, so the sir is not necessary.
Anyway, I wanted to thank you for the talk today. One of the things we talk about in Terry's class is competitive pressures, and as you've seen, there's been a lot of potential mergers in the market here in the United States, T-Mobile and Sprint kind of being the big one being talked about. How does that figure into your cost equation from 700 to 500? Does it mitigate it? Is it included there? And can you talk about whether the Vodafone sale of its stake to Verizon changes that dynamic at all?
Okay. Very good question. Now, so by the way, the numbers that I put up here they're roughly right. And as Terry will remember, it was always Arun's math. And Arun's math always, just round up and round down a little bit. I wasn't trying to be precise here. I was just trying to be, which direction is it moving in and what quantums is it moving in so that you can get your head around where the space is going. So for example, the Sprint and T-Mobile merger that's being talked about is not in those numbers. Because obviously, if you say in the extreme, 4 goes to 3, 3 goes to 2, 2 goes to 1, 700 doesn't go to 500. 700 goes to 900, right? Obviously, we'd all love a monopoly that we own. But I didn't get much of a rise out of that. On either side of that debate, by the way. But so the thing here is that markets will keep moving. First of all, it's not completely obvious to me that Sprint and T-Mobile can come together, and from a regulatory standpoint, from a DOJ standpoint, I think it's going to be a tough thing to get done. Even though if you look at it on the face of it, you could say you've got two strong players and two weak players. These two weak players really don't have enough oomph in the system to change the pricing, to change the product. So why don't you let two of the weaker players come together, become stronger, so that they can really put on some competition with the big two? That would be sort of the logical economic argument. And there is merit to that. But I just don't know if it goes through. The fact that Verizon bought the 45% of Vodafone has no impact, because Verizon Wireless continues as the operating entity today. It's just a cash flow thing. Instead of us getting part of the cash flow, they get 100% of the cash flow.
So in the answer to that last question was the first time you mentioned regulation. So why isn't the future of that last column of numbers that you become a regulated utility worldwide with your margins set, on political or regulatory grounds?
Yeah, so first of all, in most of the jurisdictions around the world, there are 4 players in each market. Usually, regulation and rate of return regulation is, I think, appropriate when you've got 1 player, maybe 2 players. You think about electric utilities, you think about gas utilities, rate of return regulation makes sense there. But when you've got 4 competitors, and innovation is an important part of what it is you're trying to do, personally, I don't think rate of return regulation is the answer here. My own view is, look, if T-Mobile and Sprint want to come together, let them come together, put out more spectrum. Let Dish become the 4th. Let Terry and Arun's new NewCo come to life. Right? He's just hanging out here for a while. He's going to end up, being an entrepreneur. So my view would be, don't try and control. Put out enough competition that people can compete, and people will compete.
No, I understand that's your view.
Yeah.
I meant that the risk is the regulators will take a different view. I mean, for instance, look at Visa and MasterCard in Europe.
Yeah.
At risk of their margins being taken away.
Yeah. No, first of all, I think Visa and MasterCard, that's, even if you throw in American Express, feels much more like a duopoly, oligopoly. And I'm not suggesting one way or the other whether they should or they shouldn't. The European Commission is looking at Google and saying, you guys have gotten too big, okay? So regulators will do what regulators think is right. Companies have to do what they think is right. And there'll always be a little bit of kind of pull and push and all of that. I'm not at all suggesting here that just let all the companies do whatever they want to do, and the world will be a better place. We saw that movie in 2008, right? That's the wrong way to think about it. There's a role for government policy, there's a role for regulation, there's a role for innovation, there's a role for companies, there's a role for activist shareholders, there's a role for everybody in this economy. And no one constituent or stakeholder gets to dominate. And that's just sort of kind of the ebb and flow of how these things move.
During your discussion about couponing and targeted advertising, one worry I had was privacy. How do you see privacy playing in that market, or is our generation just not care about privacy anymore?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because we grew up, when cell phones first came out, there was a big demand for people to know sort of, cell phone numbers and so on and so forth. And I spent a bit of time at the landline telephone company as well. We used to guard the telephone numbers of all our customers with our life. And you fast forward now, and people are putting up all kinds of information about themselves on the internet. And I have to tell you, it's sort of kind of, really? We were guarding your privacy with our lives, and now you go out and tell the world everything about you. So there is a shift here. People are obviously much more comfortable other people knowing certain things about them. My own view is there is a segment here. There's some people who are willing to have a lot of people know a lot of things. Others would say control it. And this discussion has not been had to the end. It feels like, because of the Facebooks of the world, that everything has become open. My own view is it is open till something goes seriously wrong. And when something goes seriously wrong because of the openness of this information, you will find the pendulum swinging to the other side and many more controls coming into place. And some of the issues with regard to Google and the European Union actually has that element in it, which is how much information do you have about customers? And if you're a monopoly, should you have all this information? And of course, the tagline there is only government should have this information, not private companies, right? So there's an interesting discussion and debate that's going to be had there as well. But my own view is I think the pendulum is going to go back. For me, it feels unnatural, the amount of information. And some of the things that we talked about, whether it was your credit card information, your banking information, your healthcare information, it's different to say, look, I'm here, who else is here, I'm sitting at the pub, who are my friends who want to come around and sit with me and have a beer. That's slightly different information than this is my bank account and this is how much or little money I have. That might be an issue as well. And then, here's my health situation. So as you go from casual, chatty stuff to more and more personal stuff, there'll be some lines that'll have to be marked out.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to hear your opinions on net neutrality. You talk about how, content and apps are probably going to be a big growth sector. Do you think it's justified that the people who own the pipes, because they have capital expenses to kind of keep developing and using new technologies and refurbishing, is it justified that they sort of charge a toll? And what's your opinion on that?
This is not a trick question, right? Because frankly, the whole net neutrality debate, always when I think about it, feels like there's a trick here somewhere. The point is, if I told you that on any given evening, that Netflix uses 80% of all the bandwidth that's available in the United States, do you think they should contribute something to building out that infrastructure or not?
Because customers are paying for that broadband. It seems weird to charge both ways.
Yeah, no, I hear your point. And so my view is just, it sort of depends. What will happen in my judgment is people who are using just enormous amount of bandwidth will contribute a little bit, but there have to be some standards, which basically says you can't slow down the traffic for others. So for example, take voice. Voice in a voice over IP system is still prioritized over bits and data and all of that, even today, right? Because otherwise you couldn't make proper connections and calls and so on and so forth. If in a data pipe, you can bring all the bits and bytes together towards the end on a delayed basis, but you can't do that in voice. So you're doing that in some ways today. I think the right way to think about it is for people to say, look, for all this innovation to go on, you have to have some minimum standards. And that comes part of your monthly access or whatever. But if somebody is using a lot and needs faster delivery, because otherwise their experience is deteriorated. Nobody wants to see that little circle go around and around for 15 minutes. Then you're going to have to pony up a little bit. And I think actually that's a good discussion and debate to have, because there is no such thing as a free good. And if you have free goods out there, people will misuse free goods. But equally, there needs to be a safety net underneath. And my own view is actually we will find the right balance here. This is not, it's not like we're slowing down the knowledge gathering machine of humans by asking Netflix to pay $1 a month. Okay? So if we were betting on the survival of the planet, I would say, I don't want to pay that $1. But this is Netflix.
So you talked about M2M and Internet of Things. John Chambers says that it's a $19 trillion market. Do you think this ecosystem is complete and ready for mass adoption, or there are some missing pieces in the Internet of Things ecosystem?
Yeah, so look, I think Internet of Things is going to be very big, but it's going to come in slices. It's not all going to come at one time. There are many missing pieces. If you go back to what I was saying at the front end of my discussion here, which is pieces all have to come together before the S-curve really kicks in. The Internet of Things, M2M, is a classic example of that. And my view is all the various pieces aren't there. There are manufacturers of sensors, but there isn't a good enough operating system layer yet. And it's going to go vertical by vertical by vertical by vertical. It's not going to be, one sensor is good for everything. The sensor that's good for here may not be the right sensor for your car, may not be the right sensor for healthcare, may not be the right sensor for utilities. You're going to have different verticals. And that's going to make it more complicated. One of the nice things about cell phones and smartphones and tablets is they cut across horizontally. Everybody likes them, everybody uses them, and therefore you get great economies very quickly. The minute you start going vertically, the economies of scale are that much lower, and the ability to get over the threshold to make a real commercial case becomes that much harder. Okay, Terry is cracking the whip as usual. He says one last question.
Yes, I really want to quickly end with a life lessons question. So as from your journey from a young IIT into a young MBA to a young CEO, what life lessons can you share with us, especially looking back in the things you would have done better and the things that you did that you would also advise us to do?
Okay. Choose a good life partner in your life. I'll tell you, that is the secret to everything. Find the right life partner, and you're made, which is what I did. She's not here today, but that's what I'd say. Thank you. 2
seconds. 2 seconds. So listen, just a huge thank you to Arun. You think about what he shared with us on where value is created and timing, how relevant it is for entrepreneurs, for executives, for investors, and for managing our own careers. Arun, a huge thank you for your time and your insights. We appreciate it. You were great.